Having agency is defined as the capacity of individuals to act independently and to make their own free choices. Tune in to get an inside look at the inspiring uphill climb of businesswomen from around the world. I'm your host, Cheryl Gillihan, and this is Woman-Owned Agency. Tiffani, it is so wonderful to have you with me today. This is going to be a fantastic interview. I'm so excited to share about the different things that you're doing in the space. When I met you, I was actually doing a human-centered design workshop with one of your teams, and I was so just enamored with you and your story, and we connected immediately. And we have the same birthday, which is really awesome. So it was just an immediate connection, and it's been a joy to have you facilitate some conversations with my team too about inclusion and accessibility. And you've really helped sort of broaden our perspective on that and teaching us some of the tools that you use. But today is all about you, and I want to learn a little bit more about all the work that you're doing and the agencies that you have. So if you would just introduce yourself and introduce your company.
So excited to be a part of your podcast, and just your vision coming into fruition. And every time we meet up, it's great. But like you mentioned, my name is Tiffani Martin. I am the CEO of Jansen Co, which is a digital marketing agency, as well as CEO for Visiotech, which is a web-based technology company. And we try to service persons with disability with software and hardware, and just coming up with concepts and solutions to help them advance. So those are the two companies that I've built over the years. Visiotech was the most recent one, right before the pandemic. We kind of got in at a very good. I hate to use that, that phrase right now with everything going on with the pandemic, but we kind of came in at a good spot before everything kind of hit web. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so how long have you had Jansen Co? When did you found that company?
Jansen Co was founded in 2014. And it was right, let me take it back. The idea for it was birthed in around 2008, 2010, right at, the economic bubble, as well as we were seeing a shift. That's when, Web 2.0 started coming out. And so I just took a fancy to it. And then a couple of years later in 2014, we talked to a couple business partners, and it was just something I really wanted to launch. I felt ahead of the curve in social media and in the direction it was going. And so that's how Jansen Co came about.
That's great. Would you say that you're pretty entrepreneurial? Like, do you consider yourself an entrepreneur?
I do. I had that entrepreneurial spirit at a very young age. And then I went, another thing we have in common, our alma mater, UNT. When I went there, I got my degree in entrepreneurship. And as soon as I got out of college, just started looking for business opportunities I could get in. And I started, with the business mind, but the more, I got into it, and the term social entrepreneurs, started coming out, I dove into that to see what that was about and lean more toward, my core values and what I wanted to do. So just tried to make a shift in my late 20s to kind of go into that capacity as a social entrepreneur. So
I had no idea that social enterprises even existed until I joined Cause Labs in 2010. I actually at UNT sort of wrapped up my degree in business and community service. And I thought for sure that I would go into the nonprofit sector. I knew that I wanted to do something social impact focused. And so I thought that's where my path would take me. But it was just, there were a lot of different factors and a lot of different reasons why I didn't end up in that sector. And then when I discovered Cause Labs, I was like, what is this thing? What is this social enterprise? And so recognizing that business could be for profit and for purpose was just this fascinating thing to me. And I can't unlearn that. I can't look back. I can't imagine, even if I worked for any other company, if I didn't own Cause Labs, if I did something else for my day job, I would always find a way to bring purpose into that at this point, you know?
Yeah.
I've learned so much in doing this. And so, well, tell me a little bit more about the purpose of Jansen Co and some of the impacts that you've been creating there, as well as with Visiotech.
Well, with Jansen Co, we really wanted to focus on the science behind marketing with our clients, kind of go, and you kind of know about it, dealing with nonprofits, kind of advancing, they are more prone to more traditional techniques when it comes to, fundraising and ideas on marketing. And so what I wanted to do is kind of show, here are metrics that aid into your cause. And we can back this with, storytelling of, what you need to do. And so that was one of the fun parts of the job is, meeting with different, nonprofits, coming back with the team, and then just building strategy around their core values, as well as what story are they trying to tell. I am a storyteller. Like I love knowing the different layers about what it is that people do and why they do it, and then conveying that message and studying how people gravitate toward that. So that was something I wanted to optimize with our team. Everybody, has that same spirit when we go in and meet with different companies and so forth. So that's, in a nutshell, what we do at Jansen Co. With Visiotech. The origin of that came when I actually lost my vision, and I realized the access to information and technology was so limited with people in my position, and it's even the disparity. I mean, it's even more with people in underserved communities. So it was an uphill battle to get access, but once I did, my mission was to make sure that all of this wealth of information and things out there would be accessible to everybody, no matter socioeconomic status, just anything. I wanted to get that out there. And so I wanted to utilize Visiotech as that vehicle to come up with ideas, meet with other people, collaborate in order to advance this population who has otherwise been kind of looked over. So that's Visiotech is my rebel child, if you will. So, that's it. It is, both of them are near and dear to my heart, but Visiotech is kind of where, if I could properly label both of them, Jansen Co, I can do a little bit more advocacy, but Visiotech is my rebel. We are making changes in the world. How we do it in our strategy and what we do, it differentiates between the two.
Yeah, and locally, you're getting some recognition for that rebel child as well, right? So, aren't you an advocate or ambassador in your city for those with disabilities?
I am. So, DeSoto, Texas, city of DeSoto, I met with the mayor years back, before she even became a mayor. And, once she did get elected, we had a conversation, and she was adamant about inclusion within the community and what that looks like. So I started with CPAC, which is the Citizens Police Advisory Council that they have, which I thought was unique. It's not that common, from what I've, researched. And so this gives our community an opportunity to have a representative in those meetings with our police department. So a lot of conversation comes up on, how do police officers approach, different residences that might have a persons with disability? What does that look like? different tactics that they use. How can we de-escalate situations so we don't have terrible incidences we've seen across the US with just the lack of information that, our police departments are going into these communities with. So just having that voice in those spaces is amazing. And then we've seen different spaces throughout the city making our parks, more in inclusion for not just, persons with disabilities, but our elderly community, changing places where there's steps into ramps, just being conscious about universal design and what that looks like throughout this city. So she's done a great job. And just speaking about women-owned places, this is a African-American woman as the mayor in this space. Even our council is very diverse with both not just gender, but, in race, ages. And so it's really unique to be in a community as diverse as it is. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And actually, I bet there's so much value in the discussions that actually happen on that panel, on that committee with the police force. It would be wonderful if some of that information was like open sourced and actually made publicly available, because when you said, how do you approach a home where someone with disabilities might reside? I don't know the answer to that question, and that's something that we as everyday citizens also have to encounter. What is the appropriate response? I think, in 2020, especially, there was a lot of conversation about diversity, inclusion, and particularly, related to the Black community and with everything that was going on. And, we had focus groups and panels and internal team members and a lot of conversations about what is our appropriate response to this. How do we be empathetic but not, and for me especially, as an impact company, I didn't want to jump on a bandwagon. Of course it's important to me, and of course it's something that we care about as a social impact company, as a public benefit corporation, but I didn't want to make a company statement just for the sake of making a statement.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to look like we were ignoring it either, and I wanted to take informative and actual action, and not just a statement that is like expected, like, oh, as a company, every company should be expected to say this, and I didn't want it to come across that way.
It was funny because once these things started coming out in the news, we had, different clients, we need to come up with a statement, and it opened up the conversation of, well, have you always, what have you done in the past? You don't, if you're going to talk about it now, the people out there are looking for historical, data to show that you've always had involvement in it. Otherwise, it kind of goes on deaf ears. And so it brought up a moment to pivot for some, many of the organizations we work with to start being conscious about who it is you're actually talking to, and incorporating that, that these different terms and vocabulary, into your everyday speech. So the content that you're coming out really reflects, this well-diverse idea of your support. And so that was one thing, we kind of faced and had to educate, a lot on, what that looks like when you put it out in public facing, forums.
Let's talk a little bit about that vocabulary, because we were talking earlier and you mentioned intersectionality, and I was like, that's a hard word to say.
Yeah.
But there's some great meaning behind that. And so I was sharing with you how, last year we really focused on the fact that we needed to measure how many women-owned suppliers, vendors, and agencies we actually worked with. When we were doing our annual impact audit, I didn't know the answer to the question. So the first thing we had to do was measure. And once we measured, I thought, wow, that benchmark is dismally low. It was like 3% of our vendors we knew were women-owned. And yet I know so many women-owned businesses. And so it was a matter of like auditing that and figuring out, okay, well, where can we make some shifts? Where do we host our websites? Where do we buy our paper? Where do we buy our t-shirts? And who are we partnering with for design, and who are we partnering with for content? And so we made some intentional shifts in our supply chain last year to focus more on women-owned businesses because our benchmark was really low. We had already, set some benchmarks and made that shift for environmental impact because that was our focus the year before. But then we were making that shift for women-owned businesses because there are so many of us, but I just don't feel like we're showcased and highlighted enough, which was the impetus for this podcast.
Mhm.
But when you and I were talking, you said you also, as a company, made a shift last year, and it wasn't specific to women-owned. So tell us more about the intersectionality.
So internally, just in my own space, just reflecting, I kind of took an inventory of me, if you will. So out of that came, okay, I'm a woman, I am African American, and I deal with a disability. So intersectionality became something like just an internal thing that I wanted to see realized in the work that we were doing. I don't see a lot of myself in the different spaces. I don't see myself in a lot of corporate spaces on the C-suite level. And so it was important to me to connect and collaborate with that, just to have more context to what it was we were doing as the agency, as well as taking that information and educating other, companies that don't look like me. So they understand that, there are persons, there are groups, there are communities that we're not tapping into, and you can, if I can be a representative, for that and what that looks like, then sure. So, as a team, it was one of those, we do want to help those that look like us, but we also want to take that information and share it and spread it. Whether that's through sensitivity training, whether that's, getting hired for content marketing and, building out what that looks like. It was just really important for me to work with, see, advance different areas that I saw myself in.
Yeah, and as business owners, we have to create that intention. And once we have that, then it's hard to unknow that. We can't not be aware of that in the future as we make decisions about who we're working with, who we're partnering with, which clients we take on. It's always there at that point, and once we create that intention, that's how we can actually create that change and be advocates for that and really empower that. So I'm hoping that those who listen to this podcast, one, recognize all the wonderful women that I'm able to interview, and how inspiring each of you are, but you each bring something really unique to the world and what your businesses do. Even though all of us run agencies, we all do a little bit something different. We all bring something unique to the table. And so I really value that. So is there anything, and particularly, let's talk a little bit about design and disability. Is there anything that's commonly misunderstood by your clients potentially, or when you're explaining to people that, you run a design agency?
Okay, is it pertaining to me or their ideas?
Potentially their ideas of it.
The one thing, and I don't know if it's just something that's just pronounced to me, but when we talk to different agencies or different, brands, and they want to reach the community, they automatically think that they should segment a portion of like their services or products to fit. And I'm constantly just, don't do that. Like, it's just like waving a red, like, no. And they're kind of shocked. They're like, well, we have to include them. Why wouldn't we segment? And I'm like, you are literally going against all the work and the advocacy of different groups and what they're trying to do. Like inclusion doesn't mean setting aside a portion of that service or product. Inclusion is universal design, building out stuff that includes everybody. It's already like in your strategy, in your work plan. So when you're coming out with products, you don't have to go back and focus on that portion of segmentation. It's already within what you do. One of the greatest, examples I've always heard of were just something as simple as a door. You have a just regular door. Some people, just put a doorknob on it. What if you deal with somebody with arthritis? That doesn't help them. What if you, work with somebody, whose arms are amputated or something like that? You excluded them. But let's say with a grocery store, you have an automatic door that just opens up. Well, that helps pregnant women, that might be, going to the store, having kids and, having multiple things in their hand. That helps a person who's in a wheelchair. That helps an elderly person that they don't have to, simultaneously might possibly hold a cane or a walker and try to manage the door. It's just being mindful of that design that doesn't take anything away from your design, doesn't, remove anything, omit anything, but it just keeps everything in mind. So you're just working in that mindset that includes everybody automatically. So that's the one thing that I've, noticed that is just, it's a pet peeve, but a lot of people, that's kind of what they resort to when you think of it.
You just shared so much wisdom. That was so great. And I loved the example of the door. That was like, it's an accessible story. Like we all recognize what the change is there and how that can impact multiple people. So thank you so much.
That did not come from me. That was, I have to pull it. It was an example that I heard actually from a deaf man. And he basically did a TED talk and mentioned that. And I was like, yes, like it's as simple.
It makes so much sense.
Yeah. And I always use the example of like the ramps versus the steps. And when he said, I'm like, yeah, we're saying the same thing, but yeah, like it's just, we just don't think like that. And it's just, we have to get out of this one-dimensional thinking of what somebody who's differently abled, possibly need and what that looks like on the spectrum.
Well, I would love to hear, do you have a favorite story for a project that you've worked on, or like just sharing with us, like, what do you really get passionate about? What do you love doing?
Research is my thing. Like I really enjoy it. I take a large portion out of my day dedicated to it because it helps build my creativity. And one of the projects, I can't really say it's new because it's weird. I did a proposal maybe years ago, not realizing it, but the trendy word now is the metaverse. And ironically, when Google Glass came out, you remember that ancient thing? But when it came out, I had an idea. I met with my business partner, and I'm like, hey, how can we incorporate this into the internet? Like, it was very archaic at that time. We are just spitballing and just trying to come. And I'm like, we can use these glasses, we can do different experiences, we can bring audience. And so we just wrote out the proposal. And it didn't hit. Like, we got, it's too far-fetched, that's expensive, and I'm like, no, we got it. So when, Facebook did the change to Meta, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is what we have been talking about. And so I, set aside the team. I'm like, hey, I want to restructure some things. And I do this, with my company, like every 2 to 3 years. We take an inventory where we are. And if there's some things I want to shift. It keeps us relevant, and, just on our toes. But in this case, I was like, I want to restructure. I want to get into the, metaverse. What does that look? It looks, everybody has like a common idea what that looks like for, just the normal persons, if you will. But my thing was, okay, what does this look like for persons with disability? If everything is kind of driven, you know, with AR, it's primarily a visual experience. What does this look like in other aspects? So then we started kind of like creating these spaces. What needs would be in these spaces? Who would need these spaces? How do we create the hardware to suit these persons, or the software? How do we utilize AI to make sure that this group of people, once this does, become a thing within, the next decade, that we're not behind or have to catch up, that we are already in the conversation. So what does that look like, and what is needed for that to happen? And that really came about with the pandemic in 2020. Once the offices shut down and everybody was, pushed to online working, schooling, and everything, that really gave the differently able community just a huge window of opportunity for us to get in. A lot of how we navigate the world is online. Now that the world is forced in our space, in a sense, we can get the jobs, we can get the, adequate education, we're not excluded or, thought after the fact. And so that was kind of my motivation in like, hey, I want to get in front of, the conversation and really mold out a space, to where, okay, all persons can thrive in this new universe that's coming. And so that's kind of my my passion project, one of the things that gets me excited. And then also, the fact that we can go back and bring, pull up old ideas that we see haven't, it aged well. And so that's my thing.
That gets me excited. That's really amazing and awesome. And as you were talking, I was like, gosh, yeah, like sometimes we just have to wait for technology to catch up with our ideas and like what we're thinking, because you can't get traction, you can't get funding, like it's not the right time, it's too soon, there's not enough support, there's not enough awareness, like there's just a lot of reasons why ideas might fail initially, right? So you talked a little bit about the pandemic and how it made things a lot more accessible just because everything went online. One thing that came back during the pandemic was the QR code. And I remember like the QR code was a big flop. Like it had to fail first so that enough people had awareness of what it was, and the phones actually built in the automatic reader of it. And then when it was needed in 2020, it actually succeeded, and it's like back. It's back in full force. And it makes things more accessible, actually.
Who would have thunk it? It was like it came back, and I'm like, wow. Like, I remember when it first came out, and I'm like, QR codes, everything, and it just fizzed and so forth. It just, you go to a restaurant, QR code, you're watching a YouTube video. My husband, he's like, hey, they got a QR code. I'm like, we're doing QR codes in the lower thirds now? He's like, yeah. Wow, so it's just funny how technology works. And you really have to have patience when you're dealing with it. Because like you said, it's hard to get the support behind, an idea that far in advance. But just to kind of see it come full circle, you're just like, okay, you just got to roll with it. But, that's kind of been the thing as of late, is just going back and, looking at some of the ideas we had in the, 2010, early 2010s. And it's just like, okay, we saw how things were shifting. Now we're in that shift. Okay, so how can we build this out? So it's a unique phenomenon to kind of be a part of.
Yeah, speaking of going back and, looking at old ways of doing things, people have gotten like Zoom fatigue and video fatigue, because every one of their calls is on video now. Like there's this expectation, like we're going to have a Zoom call, or we're going to have an air meet, or we're going to have, like all these different tools that are video conferencing tools. And I have actually started to tell people, like, would you prefer to have a phone call? We can do a walking meeting and both be on our phones. We don't need to be on a video conferencing call. And it's been refreshing to have like a different kind of medium, and going back to like just an old school phone call now. People are like, yes, that would be so nice.
You don't feel the pressures of the video. But
Yes,
everything
exactly.
sounds like a phone call to me. So it's like, you want to do a Zoom? I don't care. If you want to do a conference call, I don't care. So it's, yes.
Well, I would like to know if there's any other women that you know that own agencies that maybe I should have on the podcast, that I should interview, or any shout outs that you would like to share today.
Oh, as far as shout outs, nonprofit organizations, women owned, I would like to give a huge shout out to Tiara Moore. She's the founder of Ladies for Art, Culture, and Education. But that nonprofit is dedicated to just cultivating young women in different spaces, in the 3 spaces that I mentioned, in art, culture, and education. I mean, they do a range of things just in the community, providing STEM education in some aspects, providing clothing, professional working, women and everything. They're trying to get back in for, as far as like the young ladies, just spaces for mental wellness. And so it is a very holistic, well-rounded organization dedicated to young women, in which I'm ecstatic about. It's young people, and then on top of that, young women in these underserved communities, and they are really just opening up access to them and bringing them, in spaces and different experiences that they wouldn't otherwise have. So I'm very passionate about that organization.
That's great. Thanks for sharing that. I would love to meet her and also just share some of her work so that more of the community would know about what she's doing. That's fantastic. Thank you so much. And thank you for joining me today, Tiffani. It is always a pleasure. And I just have so much fun talking to you. And I just learn so much every single time.
I love you and your team. You're so fun. Whenever we, do have like, training sessions, they always come with like the best questions, so inquisitive. And I keep up with, some of them outside of, just the work and just all the advocacy that they're doing. You really have a great bunch over there.
Well, one team member that we had was so inspired from the things that you shared that he is now working primarily on disability access and technology focused on that, and being a product owner for that. So maybe you spent like an hour with our team, but you've changed lives, and you've changed like their whole career path and what they're focused on. Like there's such a passion there for the information and the work that you're bringing into the world.
I'm humbled by that statement, but anytime, I appreciate being afforded the opportunity to share that education. So I just love collaborating with you all. And like I said before, you really do have a great bunch. So